Capita envisions a future in which children and families can flourish. By prioritizing our youngest children, their families, and their communities, we have the potential to radically transform the fabric of our societies for the long term. In this series of Capita in Conversation, we talk to interviewees from around the world to hear their stories, knowledge, wisdom, and ideas on how to create child and family flourishing. In this episode, Capita's Ankita Chachra talks to Jane Gilbert, Chief Heat Officer for Florida's Miami-Dade County. In 2021, Jane became the first Chief Heat Officer in the world, a position that is now found in cities across the globe. Jane talks about how heat particularly impacts children and families, the types of strategies that can help keep residents safe, and how she is helping to create a vision for a more livable and climate-resilient city.
Hello, everyone. I am Ankita Chachra, and I work on the climate program at Capita. And today I am really excited to have this conversation with Jane Gilbert. She is the Chief Heat Officer for Miami-Dade County. She leads the resiliency strategy development to address the increasing heat and economic risks associated with extreme heat. Jane, welcome, and I am really excited for our conversation today.
Likewise, Ankita, it's great to be here.
So, Jane, I'll start with just for those who don't know, what is your role as a Chief Heat Officer? What does that entail? Can you give us a quick overview of what you do?
Sure. Yeah, of course. It's a very new kind of role that's only been emerging in the last 3.5 years, really, since I was first appointed by our mayor, Danielle Levine-Cava, 3.5 years ago. Miami is known internationally for its risks to sea level rise and hurricanes. Extreme heat, while we've always been enjoyed a tropical warm climate, extreme heat was not really originally on the radar. I came into this role after serving as the city of Miami's first chief resilience officer, working on all climate stresses and shocks and coming up with strategies collectively with our county. And when we went out into our most vulnerable communities to talk about climate stresses and other stresses, actually it wasn't sea level rise and it wasn't even hurricanes, even though those communities were hit pretty hard in 2017 by Hurricane Irma. It was extreme heat that they were experiencing day in and day out, whether it was they couldn't afford their utility bills anymore, or their AC breaks down in July and they can't get it fixed for weeks on end, or they work outside. We have over 300,000 workers that are exposed to heat every day, or they're just walking and waiting at a bus stop too long, or the kids can't play outside in summer camp anymore. And so that was what they were living, and our mayor heard that and decided we need to do something about it. She had already been a community partner with the Arsht-Rock Foundation Resilience Center, which had chosen to focus on extreme heat in cities globally. And out of that conversation was the idea of appointing someone to look at extreme heat across all departments and with external partners. Historically, heat has been addressed in cities, but it's been siloed in either an emergency response or urban planning area. And the idea with this was to really better understand the totality of health and economic impacts of extreme heat and collectively come up with a solution. So we put together a whole diverse task force. We did some vulnerability analyses and then developed a plan out of all of that. And that's what really my job is, implementing that plan.
Yeah, and I think it's getting even more and more important. Like we've seen this year was the hottest year on record. We've had the hottest July. August hasn't been far behind. I'm curious, you're at the front lines of helping your city and its residents stay cool. What are you learning when it comes to keeping families and young children specifically cool? Because you mentioned the playgrounds, and that's, for me, it's also a personal experience. I live in New York City, and this was hot. So there were days where I just didn't know where to take my son out to play, or where to seek that refuge. So I'm curious, what are you learning from the front lines when it comes to children and families?
So many people don't realize this, but from pregnant women up through adolescence, those populations are more sensitive to the impacts of extreme heat. They have a harder time regulating temperature. And it is most acute starting with pregnant women. And they can have the most negative impacts because you can have an increase in preterm births and other negative birth outcomes that can change the trajectory of that child's life in the future. So pregnant women, if they can't afford to keep themselves cool, or their place is not cool, that is one, or they work outside, those are the first and most concerning types of impacts. But if as an infant and young toddler, they're very sensitive. Young children are a little less sensitive, but still more sensitive than your average adult. Adolescents, a little more sensitive than your average adult. And children are known to play outside. You want them to be playing outside in the summer months, and they're not always also aware of how extreme heat is impacting them. In the state of Florida, we had a football player die of heat stroke, a high school player. And since then, we're required of all high school athletes to have some training on excessive heat safety and make sure that the playing fields have a wet bulb globe temperature monitor, and they take people off the field, and that they have supplies to keep cool people down in the event of excessive heat stress. But there's so many other things that we need to look at. Playgrounds. We're starting to move from traditional playgrounds with man-made shade structures to nature-based playgrounds with lots of natural shade, because trees cool down the playground much more than your man-made shade structure because of not only the shade, but the evapotranspiration. We're investing more in splash pads and other cooling mechanisms, opening our pools longer to make sure that children and families have that place to go when it is excessively hot, which in Miami now we've had 46 or 47. I think we have another heat advisory today in just this year. And our heat advisory threshold is above a heat index of 105 or more. So I would say there are many situations that can put someone at risk, but it's the home, it's the workplace, it's the playground, it's the bus stop. Those are the places that I worry about the most.
Yeah, and I mean also with children, and I know we, when I met you in Miami, and I brought this up, you were really able to explain and talk about all the things that I had been looking at and researching on children's health, but also the fact that they can't regulate their body temperature is such a key factor. And I don't know how many parents are actually aware of that, and how to even dress children, and where to take them during these extreme, very hot days. And I see that a lot even here in New York City, where we have a lot of splash pads, and that's generally the places that are most crowded. I'm curious, a lot of cities are also experimenting with cooling centers. And I always wonder, in terms of access, and especially here in the city that I live in, a lot of them are in senior homes and not necessarily accessible for children and families. And there's also a barrier on getting information on how and where to access them. What are the benefits or what are the drawbacks of cities focusing excessively on cooling centers as the solution, whereas it might be a more overarching and a more holistic approach from, nature-based solutions to thinking of the cooling, to thinking of just the passive and active ways of keeping people cool.
Well, I think of this as you need a multi-pronged strategy. You can't do nature-based solutions in isolation of thinking about emergency response. And that's really why my position was created, was in order to really have that multi-pronged approach. So we do have cooling sites. Our families use libraries mostly, and we have over 40 library sites that are open the lion's share of the day. And then we have some park facilities and our downtown government center. But to your point, families want to be able to stay cool at home. They've got things to do. A big focus is also, how do we help people stay cool at home affordably with efficient homes and efficient AC systems? That we've increased our funding for weatherization programs, for access to efficient AC. We need to do a lot more of that. And it is not only to keep the homes cool. But with a high humidity in Miami, we have a lot of homes with mold if they're not adequately cooled. And that can bring on the combination of heat and mold has risen our pediatric asthma outbreaks and other health respiratory challenges for families. So it's really important that they have that access to that adequate cooling. We could bring down emergency department visits and hospitalizations. It should be considered like almost a prescription, because to protect that pregnant woman, to protect those young children from having pretty serious negative health outcomes if they don't have access to it. So that's the thing we're really trying to. We also provide 30,000 households with utility assistance every year to make sure that they can stay safe at home. So that's the first couple of things. But then, yes, we need to cool down our neighborhoods. Our areas where we have the highest heat-related illnesses are our urban heat islands. And it is not just a small disparity, like a 20%. Those areas have 4 times the rates of heat-related emergency department visits and hospitalizations than other zip codes in the county. And the top correlating factors are high poverty rates and high land surface temperatures. So we need to make sure those areas, we increase the tree canopy, we increase the amount of pervious surfaces and other cooling mechanisms, nature-based playgrounds, access to bus shelters and more shade structures, because people have to get to places outside. They may not get to places by car.
And it is interesting because I think that, when you mention this idea of thinking and taking this holistic approach, thinking of all these different pieces coming together, for me, what I was really impressed by was Miami's also the communication campaign, and how do you get to most people to recognize what's happening, right? Like how do you get the information to people themselves? So one is the communication, but there's also the behaviors that might have to change. And we've always explored at Capita and talked about like how we might actually start thinking of like when the summer break happens, or like when children actually go outside to play. Maybe it's during the darker hours. I mean, of course, humidity is another challenge, but at least in places where you've got drier heat, like, evening and early hours tend to be slightly cooler. So maybe there's a recess time that needs to change. So there are a lot of these other tweaks that we can make while we're adapting, while those trees are growing, while we're taking that long approach. How are you approaching that? And it'll be interesting to hear specifically, when it comes to children, and especially also children in schools, like, are there communications that you're, addressing with school systems or early care and learning systems?
Absolutely. So first, we do a broad scale set of marketing through outdoor media, billboards, bus shelters, bus ads, digital media and gas stations, grocery stores, all 3 languages that are spoken here predominantly in Miami: English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. We do radio spots, television, and those have a simple message, but we have different people who are our spokespersons. So we'll have outdoor workers, we'll have pregnant women and specific messaging around pregnant women. We'll have specific messaging around kids, elderly, and we do a series of heat safety trainings for key leaders throughout the community. So we partner with an organization called the Children's Trust that provides funding to all early childhood programs and summer camp and after school programs. And they market our heat safety trainings, and we offer those in English and Spanish. And we've had great success in providing those simple web-based trainings for the summer camp and early childhood staff. So they are aware of the vulnerabilities, but also what to do, the signs to look out for heat stress, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and what to do in each of those cases. And in the case of our own county summer camps, we train all the staff, and we provide them supplies of cooling towels and instant ice packs and electrolytes to make sure that they all have on hand what they need to be able to respond.
It's really inspiring to see all the different pieces that you're touching in Miami. I'm also curious of the barriers or the challenges. Like, if you were to get everything right and there were no barriers, if that's the world that we're imagining, what are the things that would need to be addressed, both in the field of planning, but also in terms of cross-sectoral collaboration? Because, you're thinking across sectors, and I think that's the strength of this work that you're doing, that it's not embedded just in planning. It's not embedded in health. It's really thinking across different sectors, across different departments. Where do you see the biggest gaps or, potential?
Yeah. So I'll talk about two areas. One is in resilient housing and the other is in the urban planning realm. So when it comes to housing, where people live, we're still struggling with making sure our renters have access to affordable cooling and safe homes. That is a piece. It's harder because the property owners don't stand to benefit the reduction of the utility costs. And so we're working towards funding and financing solutions that can address that gap. There's still gaps in funding even for low-income homeowners to access all the things they need. Particularly what we find is the homes need the bigger investment of a roof or windows and doors, and the programs don't pay for that. So then they can't access the other retrofits. And so those are some of the things we're seeking for solutions. If we could combine the benefits that it would be not only to health insurance, but flood and wind insurance and reduction in utility costs so they can pay their mortgage easier, all these things. If we could somehow combine those benefits, perhaps we could address that gap. When it comes to the urban realm of enhancing tree canopy in the areas where we need it most, there are many challenges because these are areas that have been built up over time, lots of concrete and asphalt. They may be small single-family lots with multi-generations living in them, and therefore maybe they have 3 cars and they can't afford to put any trees in their front yard. And then also with our engineers in the right-of-way, they are very focused on making sure that they move stormwater quickly and they know how to design those systems with gray infrastructure. But what we need to do is have landscape architects partnered with the engineers up front to fully understand the benefits that a tree and bioswales and green infrastructure can provide to reducing flood risk, to improving water and air quality, to mitigating our urban heat islands, to just beautifying a neighborhood. We're looking to pilot projects in partnership with those partner departments so that they can see the benefits and we can work out approaches that meet the engineering requirements or performance requirements, but also enhance the neighborhood. We really, if we want to have a more walkable, bikeable, transit-oriented city, which most people really do want, it has to be safe to walk and wait at a bus stop.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. So I used to, in my past, work, I've done a lot of work around road safety and street design. And for the longest time, I'd been talking about safety from a speed perspective, reducing the exposure to cars and speed, higher speeds. And I feel now, since working on climate, I feel that without talking about shade, we're not talking about safety anymore, because you might be protecting individuals from, traffic fatalities and traffic violence, but you are not protecting them from overall risks to their health when it comes to extreme heat, and especially the way cities are facing these challenges now. And it's also interesting because for me, it's been always this idea that it's really not about the space, right? In our cities, it's really about priorities.
Yes.
And there is enough space on our streets. We give it to parking, or we give it to like travel lanes where our sidewalks are squished or bike lanes won't exist, or, there's no space for trees. but it really is about the prioritizing.
It's absolutely. And some cities have started to do this. Our city within Miami-Dade County, Miami Beach, is now prioritizing pedestrians first, then bicyclists, then the buses, and then single-use cars. In many areas, that is the right way. Not everywhere, but there are many areas where we do absolutely need to shift our prioritization.
Oh, this has been a great conversation. We've touched on almost every aspect that I could dream of as an urban designer to talk about, Jane. But I have maybe two questions for you. One is, in this work, as you're moving forward with so many inspiring examples that are already there in the work that you're doing, and of course you've got the work cut out for yourself, challenges that you're trying to address. What is your North Star? What guides your work every day?
I think my North Star is, well, I don't know if it's one, but I do hold in my head the images of the people that I know are most vulnerable. But I also hold in my head that if we can get it right, it's actually a community we all want to live in. And it's a better, not just because it's more heat safe, but it is that walkable, bikeable, transit-oriented, mixed income, mixed use community that actually is an improved quality of life with more green space. And so I think those are my two North Stars, is holding in, who is this for? And what are we moving towards that is a positive outcome?
That's so nicely put. Even in the U.S. Early Years Climate Action Plan, one of the things that we mention is that when we're focusing on children and families, when we're really putting them in the center, it's a ripple effect. It's not just, giving them what they need and addressing their needs. It means exactly what you said: cleaner air for everyone, more green space for everyone, a more livable environment for everyone. And I think that is such a beautiful way to lead this very important but urgent, but also sometimes, like you kind of feel like there's so much happening, there's so much to address. So it's really a beautiful way to lead that work. Last question that we ask almost all of our participants and those who we speak with is one project that you've dreamed of, and it can be a personal or a professional project, but haven't started yet.
So I would love to take one neighborhood that is highly vulnerable for all the reasons that I've talked about and do a holistic cooling solution across a neighborhood. Really focus and see, and then be able to quantify those benefits, some that I would expect and probably many more that you wouldn't even think of as benefits over time. That would be a real dream project.
So like an ideal cool neighborhood that exists. Oh, that would be fun. Please do give us a call if you are planning. But this has been great, Jane. Thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to all the endeavors and all the amazing work that you're doing. And we'll speak more later.
Great. Thank you.
Each episode of Capita in Conversation is produced by Michael Bettis and is available by podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as capita.org.